The night is quiet, but it feels wrong. Heavier than it should, like the air itself is holding its breath. In the darkness, every shadow stretches a little too far. Every creak and rustle in the distance takes on a new meaning. Tonight, we step into stories that crawl under your skin and refuse to let go. Moments from cold, forgotten places where fear lingers long after the world thinks the danger is gone. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this video with anyone who wants a real chill down their spine. And I want to hear from you. Comment below if you've ever felt that kind of unease that can't be explained. Now, step carefully and keep your senses sharp, because once these stories reach you, they won't leave easily. I grew up in eastern Kentucky, so driving those back roads never scared me the way it scares outsiders. I knew which curves iced over first, which hollers swallowed cell signal, which ridgelines caught snow before the valleys did. That New Year's Eve, I figured I was being smart, leaving early, beating the worst of the storm and making it back to my cabin before midnight. The sky had that dull, pewter look it gets right before snow, and the air felt tight in my chest, like the weather was already pressing down. I remember thinking I'd be asleep by 12, maybe wake up to a quiet, clean world in the morning. The radio started acting up about an hour in. At first, it was just static between stations. Nothing unusual out there, but then every channel I flipped to landed on the same thing. Old gospel hymns, thin and warbly, like they were being broadcast from a church basement with bad wiring. No DJ voices, no ads, just hymns bleeding into each other. I kept driving, fingers drumming the wheel, telling myself it was coincidence that rural stations shared transmitters sometimes. Then even that faded, the singing stretching into a long metallic whine before cutting out completely. After that, there was nothing but the hum of my tires and the soft hiss of snow starting to fall. Midnight came without ceremony. No countdown, no cheers, just the dash clock clicking over while I was winding through a narrow stretch where the trees crowd the road so close their branches almost touch overhead. A few seconds later, fireworks started going off somewhere over the ridgeline to my right. Bright white and red flashes lit up the bare trees, the sound echoing and bouncing through the holler in a way that made it hard to tell how far away they were. I smiled, relieved. It felt normal, people celebrating, proof I wasn't as alone out there as the silence made it seem. Then they stopped. Not one by one, not fading out, but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The echoes died and left behind a silence so thick it felt physical. Even the wind seemed to pause. I remember my grip tightening on the wheel, my shoulders creeping up toward my ears. The woods felt like they were leaning in, listening. I laughed under my breath, embarrassed at myself, and kept driving. That's when I saw the first person. They were standing just off the shoulder, half hidden by a stand of trees, bundled in a heavy coat. At first, I thought they were waiting for a ride. Maybe someone whose car had slid off earlier. As my headlights swept over them, they turned their heads slowly, deliberately, to watch me pass. They didn't lift a hand, didn't smile, just watched. I told myself not to stare, eyes back on the road, but a mile later there was another one, and then another, spaced out along the road every few hundred yards, always standing still, always facing the trees until my car came into view. None of them had phones out. None were lighting fireworks or even talking to each other. They stood alone, shoulders hunched, hands down at their sides. When my headlights caught their faces, I saw blank expressions, mouths slightly open like they'd forgotten to close them. Each time they turned in that same slow way, following my car with their eyes until I was past. No flinching at the lights, no surprise. Just watching. I started to feel like I was doing something wrong just by being there, like I'd driven into a place I wasn't meant to see. The snow picked up, thick flakes streaking through the beams of my headlights, making the road feel narrower, more claustrophobic. I checked my phone. No signal. The dash lights flickered once, just a brief dimming, and my stomach dropped. A few miles later, the engine coughed. Just a hiccup at first, then another. I eased off the gas, heart hammering, whispering at the car like it could hear me. It died right as I rolled past an abandoned coal tipple, the skeletal structure looming over the road like a rusted rib cage. The headlights stayed on, thank God, but the engine was dead. When I turned the key, all I got was a weak click. I sat there for a long time, hands frozen on the wheel, listening to the sudden quiet. The snow muffled everything, even my own breathing sounded too loud. I thought about getting out, popping the hood, but the image of those people standing along the road flashed in my mind. I locked the doors instead, the click echoing in the cab. That's when I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching softly in the fresh snow. Not rushing, not hesitant, just steady, circling the car at a distance. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield, but the darkness beyond the headlights was impenetrable. Every time the steps got closer, my chest tightened, then they'd drift away again. I couldn't tell how many there were. Sometimes it sounded like one set, sometimes like more. I tried the horn. The sound blasted out, harsh and ugly, then died, swallowed by the trees. The footsteps paused. For a few seconds, there was nothing. I held my breath. Then, from somewhere just beyond the reach of the headlights, a voice spoke. "Happy New Year." It was soft, almost careful, like the person was testing the words. After a pause, the voice said it again. "Happy New Year." Same tone, same cadence, no emotion behind it, just repetition. I pressed myself back into the seat, tears stinging my eyes. My mind raced through possibilities. Drunks, some kind of prank, people messing with a stranded driver, but none of it fit. The voice didn't slur, didn't laugh. It sounded studied, like someone who'd heard the phrase but never used it before. The footsteps started again, circling wider this time. Another voice joined in, then another, each one saying the same two words, out of sync, overlapping in a way that made my skin crawl. None of them raised their voices. None came close enough for me to see them. They just walked and whispered, over and over, practicing. I stayed like that for hours. My legs cramped. My throat went raw from breathing through my mouth, too scared to make any sound. At some point, the whispers stopped. The footsteps faded. The snow kept falling. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is a gray light filtering through the trees and the cold, biting deeper into my bones. When I opened my eyes fully, the woods were empty. No people, no movement. Just the abandoned tipple, half buried in snow, and my car sitting alone on the road. I unlocked the door and stepped out, my boots sinking into pristine snow. I walked a slow circle around the car, my heart pounding, scanning the tree line. There were no footprints. None. The snow was smooth and untouched in every direction, except for my own tracks from stepping out of the car. No signs of anyone circling, no marks near the road where people might have stood watching. It was like they'd never been there at all. A passing truck finally came along a little after dawn. The driver helped me get a jump, and the engine turned over like nothing had ever been wrong. He asked if I was okay, gave me a funny look when I said I was fine. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I made it back to my cabin and spent the rest of the day staring out the window, watching the snow fall. Every year since, when New Year's Eve comes around and I hear fireworks in the distance, I think about how they stopped all at once that night. I think about those people standing in the cold, watching the sky, practicing how to be human. And I wonder sometimes if they're still out there, waiting for the next midnight to come. My family has always had a habit of starting the year by visiting the dead. It's not something we talk about much, just something that's always being done. Every New Year's Day, after the late night noise dies down and the roads clear, we drive up to the old cemetery on the hill and stand quietly by the graves of our grandparents and great-grandparents. We clean off the stones, say a few words, then leave before the cold seeps too deep into our bones. Last year, though, the weather turned bad early. Snow came down hard, the kind that sticks fast and turns back roads into slick ribbons of ice. My parents decided to wait until morning, but I didn't want to. Something in me felt restless, like if I didn't go then, I'd be breaking more than a tradition. So I went alone, just after midnight, telling myself I'd be quick. The drive up the mountain was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No fireworks, no distant music drifting through hollers like you usually hear, even on bad weather nights. Just the crunch of snow under my tires and the dark pressing in from both sides of the road. The cemetery sits on a bald hill, ringed by woods that have been slowly creeping closer over the years. Trees that weren't there when I was a kid now loom right up against the fence, their bare branches clawing at the sky. When I pulled into the small gravel lot, my headlights washed over the stones, pale shapes rising and falling with the slope of the hill. As soon as I shut the car off, my phone buzzed once, then went dead. No service. Not unusual up there, but it still made me uneasy. What bothered me more was the air. It didn't feel like winter. The cold was there, sure, but underneath it was something warmer, damp and heavy, like the inside of a cellar. I stood by my car for a moment, breath fogging, listening. The woods were too quiet. No wind in the branches, no distant dogs barking. Just silence pressing in on my ears. I grabbed the flowers I'd brought and walked toward my grandfather's grave. My boots crunched softly on the snow-dusted grass, the sound echoing more than it should have. Halfway there, I heard voices. At first, I thought it was people down the hill, maybe neighbors celebrating late, their sound carrying weird through the cold air. Then I realized what they were saying. They were counting down. 10, 9, 8. The voices were distant, drifting through the trees on all sides, overlapping each other. Some sounded young, others old, but all of them were muted, like they were speaking through thick walls. I frowned and checked my watch. It was already past 12. Midnight had come and gone. Still, the counting continued, steady and slow. They reached 3, 2, then stopped. There was a pause, long enough for my skin to prickle, and then they started again. 10, 9, 8. I stood there, flowers clutched tight, trying to make sense of it. The sound wasn't moving like people walking. It was anchored, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. As I listened more closely, my stomach dropped. The voices weren't above ground. They were coming from below, from the graves themselves. The sound was low, muffled by earth, like voices heard through dirt and stone. I could feel it more than hear it, a faint vibration under my feet, like the ground was humming. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it had to be my imagination, nerves playing tricks on me in the dark. But then laughter bubbled up between the numbers. Soft, breathy laughter. Wrong, somehow, like people who hadn't laughed in a long time trying to remember how. I forced myself to keep walking. My grandfather's stone came into view, the familiar name carved deep, dusted with snow. Seeing it grounded me a little. I knelt and brushed the stone clean, whispering a greeting, my voice sounding too loud in the open air. The counting didn't stop. It restarted again, closer now, like the voices were gathering strength. That's when I noticed the cracked headstone. It was just a few feet away, closer to the tree line. The stone had split clean down the middle, the two halves pushed outward. Fresh dirt spilled out from the base, dark and wet against the white snow. The ground around it was disturbed, as if something underneath had pressed up hard enough to break through. I stared at it, my heart pounding, mind scrambling for an explanation. Frost heave, maybe. Old stones do that sometimes, but the dirt looked too fresh, too deliberate. The voices shifted. The counting slowed, dragging out each number. I could hear breath now, strained and close. My chest tightened as a terrible thought crept in. What if they weren't counting down to midnight? What if they were counting up to something else? To the moment the year was new enough for them to follow. I backed away, one step at a time, eyes never leaving the cracked grave. The laughter rose, echoing under the ground, joined by something that sounded like fingernails scraping against wood or stone. I turned and ran. I don't remember much about the walk back to my car, just flashes. Slipping on the snow, the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. The counting growing louder, more frantic, voices overlapping and stumbling over each other like they were rushing now. 10, 9, 8. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. When I finally got the door open and slammed it shut, the sound of the voices dulled but didn't disappear. I started the car and peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying, not daring to look back. As I drove down the hill, I swear I felt the ground shudder, like something heavy shifting beneath the earth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room until dawn, lights on, replaying every sound and image over and over. In the morning, my uncle called to see if I'd made it home. Safe. When I told him I'd gone up to the cemetery alone, there was a long pause on the line. "You shouldn't have gone at night," he said quietly. I asked him why. Another pause. Then he told me about something I'd never heard before. Decades ago, long before I was born, the cemetery had been vandalized on a New Year's Eve. Headstones broken, graves dug into. The people responsible claimed they were trying to stop something. They said the dead were trying to come back with the year, that New Year's was a thin time, when the ground didn't know what it was supposed to hold on to. Most folks chalked it up to drunken hysteria or a cruel prank, and the story faded with time. Repairs were made. The hill grew quiet again. My uncle finished by telling me not to worry, that old stories have a way of getting twisted. But his voice wasn't convincing. It trembled, just a little. Later that day, I drove past the hill on my way into town. I didn't stop. I couldn't. From the road, I could see fresh tire tracks leading up to the cemetery, county trucks parked along the fence. They said later that some stones had shifted overnight, that animals must have been digging. No mention of voices, no mention of counting. This year, when New Year's came around, my family went together in broad daylight. The cracked stone had been replaced. The dirt was packed down smooth. Everything looked normal, but as we stood there in silence, I felt it again, that faint warmth under the cold, that sense of pressure from below. I kept my eyes on the horizon, listening hard. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I still think I can hear it. A voice, far underground, starting the count all over again, waiting for the year to turn just right. I rented that cabin because I didn't want to see another year end in front of people who pretended they understood me. West Virginia felt far enough away to disappear for a while, and the listing promised exactly what I wanted. No neighbors, no signal, just snow, trees, and quiet. The drive up the mountain already felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The road narrowed into rutted gravel, trees leaning in like they were listening, branches heavy with old snow that hadn't melted in weeks. By the time I reached the cabin, dusk had settled thick and gray, and the silence pressed against my ears so hard it felt like pressure changes before a storm. The cabin itself was smaller than the pictures suggested. One bedroom, a combined kitchen and living area, and a bathroom tucked into the back. Logs dark with age, a low porch sagging slightly on one corner. When I unlocked the door, the smell hit me first. Cold wood, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old tools left out in the rain. I told myself it was normal. Old places always smelled like that. I unloaded my things quickly, eager to get back inside before full dark. Once the door shut, the quiet deepened, broken only by the low hum of the heater kicking on. There was no cell service like the listing said, which I'd expected, but something about seeing no signal on my phone still made my chest tighten. I turned the phone off and set it face down, like it was a bad habit I was trying to quit. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in long, slow waves. It didn't howl, it whispered. That bothered me more. I spent the evening trying to distract myself. I cooked a simple meal, ate standing up at the counter, and drank more whiskey than I meant to. I put on a record I'd brought with me, but the crackle felt too loud in the small space, so I shut it off. Around 10, I noticed how often the cabin made noise. Not sharp sounds, no bangs or crashes, but creaks, pops, and slow settling groans that almost sounded deliberate, like someone shifting their weight carefully, trying not to be noticed. By 11:30, the snow outside had started again. Thick flakes drifted past the windows, reflecting the porch light in brief flashes. I stood there watching, feeling that familiar New Year's heaviness creep in. The kind where your past year lines up behind your eyes whether you want it to or not. I remember checking the time and thinking I'd just go to bed early, skip midnight altogether. That was when the first knock came. It wasn't on the door. It came from the wall behind the couch, a single, dull tap. I froze, listening. The heater hummed, the wind whispered, then another tap. Same spot, same measured force. Not random, not settling wood. Someone was controlling it. I stepped closer to the wall, heart already racing, and put my ear near the logs. Nothing. When I straightened up, the tapping started again. 3 slow knocks in a row, each one spaced evenly apart, like a metronome. I backed away, suddenly aware of how thin the walls really were. I told myself it had to be temperature changes. Old cabins did weird things in winter. Still, my hands were shaking when I checked the door and windows, half expecting to see someone standing on the porch. No one was there. Just snow and darkness, and my own breath fogging the glass. I tried to laugh it off. Poured another drink, sat back down. The knocking returned, this time from a different wall. Slow, intentional. It moved around the room, never repeating the same spot twice. I checked my watch. 11:50. That's when I realized the rhythm wasn't random. The taps were spaced exactly 1 second apart. My stomach dropped as the pattern clicked into place. Something was counting. The power went out at midnight. The heater died mid-hum. The porch light snapped off. The cabin fell into a darkness so complete it felt physical, like a weight pressing down on my eyes. I stood there, frozen, listening to my own breathing echo too loudly in the silence. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the knocking stopped. Relief washed over me so fast my knees almost buckled. I told myself it was over. Power outages happened in storms. The knocking had just been old wood and my imagination lining things up because of the time. I reached for a flashlight I'd left on the counter. Before I could turn it on, a voice whispered, 10. It didn't come from any one place. It felt like it slid through the cabin itself, seeping out of the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The voice was dry and thin, like someone who hadn't spoken out loud in a long time. It wasn't loud, but it was close. Too close. 9. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered across the floor, the sound painfully sharp in the dark. My heart was slamming so hard I felt dizzy. I backed toward the hallway, hands out in front of me, as if I could push the darkness away. 8. The voice shifted position. I could tell it was moving, traveling through the walls like something crawling behind them. Each number came from a different direction, spiraling inward. 7. I ran. I don't remember deciding to go to the bathroom. My body just took over. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, then collapsed against it, gasping. The bathroom had no windows. I fumbled for the light switch out of habit, then remembered the power was out. I slid down to the floor, knees to my chest, pressing my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. 6. The voice was closer now, right on the other side of the wall. I could hear the cabin creaking along with it, like the building itself was responding. The logs popped softly, the floor groaned, and for a moment it felt like the whole structure was breathing in sync with the countdown. 5. I thought about the listing, about the owner, about how cheap the place had been for New Year's Eve. I thought about how no one knew exactly where I was. 4. Something brushed the wall behind me. Not a knock, not a tap. A slow dragging sound, like fingers tracing the grain of the wood. 3. I pressed my face into my knees and squeezed my eyes shut, certain that at any second the wall would give way, that a hand would reach through and grab me. 2. The whisper was right above me now, in the ceiling. Dust sifted down, landing in my hair, on my shoulders. 1. Nothing happened. No explosion of sound, no crash. Just silence so complete it rang in my ears. I stayed there, shaking for what felt like hours. I didn't move until the gray light of morning started to creep under the door. When I finally unlocked it, my hands were stiff with cold and fear. The cabin looked unchanged. The walls were intact. No marks, no holes. Just old wood and quiet. The power came back on sometime after sunrise. I packed my things without eating, without sitting down, without looking too closely at anything. As I was loading my car, the owner pulled up in a truck I hadn't heard approach. He was an older man, weathered, eyes sharp in a tired way. He asked how my stay was. I must have looked as bad as I felt, because his expression shifted before I said a word. I told him about the knocking, about the voice. I expected denial, a laugh. Instead, he nodded slowly. He told me the cabin used to belong to his cousin, a man who lived alone, kept journals obsessively, pages and pages of numbers, countdowns, notes about time slipping, about years that took people if you weren't careful. On New Year's Eve, years back, the man vanished. No tracks in the snow, no body. Just the journals left behind, open to a page that ended at 1. The owner said he stopped renting the cabin around the holidays after that. Then he looked at me and added, almost as an afterthought, that the man used to say the cabin remembered, that it counted for him when he couldn't anymore. I left without replying. Even now, years later, when New Year's Eve comes around, I hear that rhythm sometimes. Slow, steady, counting seconds I can't afford to lose. I've been hauling freight long enough to know when something feels off, and that night still sits in me like a stone. It was New Year's Eve, southern Appalachia. One of those routes nobody takes unless they have to. The kind of road that snakes between black hills and disappears into fog so thick it eats your headlights. I was pushing to make it home before midnight, watching the clock glow green on the dash, calculating miles the way you do when you're tired and stubborn and just want your own bed. The radio kept losing signal, cycling between static and fragments of country songs, and every so often I'd catch the distant pop of fireworks from some valley town I couldn't see. Around 11:40, the traffic ahead of me started slowing, not abruptly. No screeching brakes, no flashing hazards, just a gradual, unnatural crawl, like something invisible had put a hand on the line of cars and was easing us all down at the same pace. Red brake lights bloomed one by one in the fog until the whole road looked like a string of dying embers. I leaned forward, squinting, expecting to see a wreck or a trooper's cruiser blocking the lane, but there was nothing. Just trees pressing in close on both sides, bare branches clawing at the mist. I checked my mirrors. No one tailgating, no one panicking. Everyone moved together, steady and patient, like they'd all agreed on something I hadn't been told. The CB crackled once, then went dead. I tapped it, adjusted the knob, but only got static. That should have been my first real warning. On that stretch, truckers usually chatter non-stop, especially on a holiday night. By 11:50, we were barely rolling. I could see maybe 10 cars ahead of me, their shapes smeared by fog. Somewhere out there, someone must have known why we were slowing, but nobody honked. Nobody tried to pass. It felt less like traffic and more like a procession. My stomach tightened, and I caught myself counting my breaths, listening to the hum of the engine and the faint hiss of tires on damp asphalt. Then, just before midnight, every car ahead of me eased onto the shoulder at the exact same time, not staggered, not hesitant. It was like watching a choreographed move. One moment we were creeping forward, the next the whole line drifted right, blinkers flashing in unison. I rolled to a stop behind the last sedan, my hands slick on the wheel. I stayed in my cab. I don't know why that decision felt so important, but it did. Something in me said, if I opened that door, I wouldn't get back in the same way. The fog pressed against my windshield, and the woods loomed just beyond the narrow strip of gravel. Tall hardwoods, pines and underbrush so dense it looked solid. No houses, no lights, just forest. Doors opened ahead of me. One by one, people stepped out of their cars. Men, women, a couple of families. They didn't talk to each other. They just stood beside their vehicles, all facing the same direction, toward the trees. Their breath puffed white in the cold air. I could see their silhouettes clearly, lit by taillights, their faces turned away from me. My clock clicked over to 11:59. I thought maybe it was some kind of roadside tradition, locals welcoming the new year in their own way. That idea didn't last long. Nobody laughed, nobody hugged. They stood rigid, shoulders squared, heads tilted slightly, like they were listening for something deep in the woods. The fog seemed thicker there, swallowing the tree line, and I had the strange impression that the forest was closer than it had been a minute ago. When midnight hit, a voice carried down the line. Low at first, almost swallowed by the mist. 10. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't cheerful. It sounded practiced. Another voice joined in. 9. Then another. And another. Soon they were all counting together, a slow, steady chant rolling through the fog. Their voices overlapped in a way that made it hard to tell where one ended and the next began. I felt my skin prickle, a cold sweat breaking out under my jacket. I watched their heads move in perfect time, nodding with each number. With each count, the woods seemed to answer back. Not with words, but with sounds. A distant crack of a branch, a rustle that moved sideways instead of forward, something like a breath drawn through leaves. I told myself it was animals, deer or raccoons disturbed by the noise, but it didn't settle right. It felt deliberate, like a response. When they reached 0, they didn't cheer. They didn't say, "Happy New Year." They said the year itself, all of them together, drawing it out like a name. Their voices dropped lower, heavier, vibrating in my chest through the glass. It felt less like calling in a new year and more like calling something else awake. As they spoke, a sound rose from the trees. A murmur at first, almost too low to hear, like wind moving through a hollow. Then it grew, layered with faint human noises that didn't quite form words. I leaned forward, straining, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might shake the cab. Shapes moved at the edge of the fog. I couldn't see them clearly, just darker patches sliding between trunks, too tall to be animals, too hunched to be men standing straight. I told myself it was my eyes playing tricks, shadows bending in the mist, but the chant faltered for just a second, and every person out there stiffened, like they'd felt something change. I ducked down instinctively, peering over the dash. My breath fogged the glass. I didn't want anyone to see me watching. I didn't want to be acknowledged at all. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The sound from the woods faded. The people beside their cars relaxed, shoulders dropping. A few of them nodded, not to each other, but toward the trees, like they were acknowledging something unseen. They got back into their cars calmly. No rush, no fear on their faces. Engines started, turn signals clicked off. One by one, they pulled back onto the road and drove away, disappearing into the fog ahead. Traffic flowed again, smooth and ordinary, like nothing had happened. I sat there for a long moment, my foot hovering over the pedal, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to put distance between myself and that place. I eased back onto the road and followed, keeping my distance, watching taillights fade. For miles, everything seemed normal. The fog thinned. The road straightened. The radio picked up a station, some DJ laughing about resolutions and hangovers. I started to think I'd imagined it, that exhaustion and darkness had twisted a harmless moment into something sinister. Then I noticed the marks on the shoulder. Long stretches where the gravel was pressed down in deep, irregular patterns, like something heavy had crossed back and forth. In a few spots, the brush was broken, snapped low, as if by hands pulling themselves out. I caught a glimpse of footprints in the mud where the fog thinned near a creek crossing. Bare feet, too many toes in one print, smeared like they'd been dragged. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept driving until the sky began to lighten, until the hills softened into familiar shapes and the road signs started making sense again. By the time the sun came up, I was shaking from more than just fatigue. I made it home after sunrise, parked the rig, and sat there for a long time before going inside. I didn't tell my wife what happened. I didn't know how to put it into words without sounding crazy. I slept most of that day, but I dreamed of fog and counting voices and shapes waiting just beyond the reach of headlights. In the years since, I've talked to other drivers who run that route. Most of them laugh it off, say traffic does weird things in the mountains, say people get superstitious around the holidays. A few go quiet. One old-timer told me there are places in those woods where folks have been making deals longer than there's been pavement, where the line between who belongs to the land and who just passes through gets thin at certain times. I don't know what they were calling to that night, or what answered. I just know I won't be on that road when the year turns over. Every New Year's Eve, I take a different route or pull over early and wait it out. Sometimes, just before midnight, I swear I can still hear counting in the distance. Carried on the wind, slow and patient, like it knows I remember. I'd never heard of Pine Hollow until the winter my truck broke down on Route 33, right as the mountains started closing in and the radio lost signal. The map app showed a thin gray line branching off the highway, and at the end of it, a name that sounded more like a rumor than a place. Pine Hollow. I remember laughing under my breath, thinking it was the kind of town people only stopped in when they didn't have a choice. I followed that road because the snow was getting heavier and my engine was coughing like it had something stuck in its throat. The town sat low in a bowl of trees, cabins and old storefronts pressed together like they were bracing against the woods. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, waiting quiet. Even with snow falling, you usually hear something. Wind through branches, a dog barking, a distant engine. Pine Hollow had none of that. Just the soft crunch of my tires and the feeling that the trees were leaning in to listen. There was a hand-painted sign nailed to a telephone pole near the center of town. New Year's Eve party, community hall. All welcome. Someone had added fireworks in red marker that bled into the wood grain. I parked near a diner that looked permanently closed and walked toward the hall, mostly because the idea of being alone out there felt worse than stepping into a room full of strangers. Inside, maybe 20 people had gathered. That was it. 20, maybe 25 at most. The hall was too big for them, chairs stacked along the walls like they'd expected more. Everyone looked local, the kind of folks whose faces seemed carved by weather rather than age. They talked quietly, leaned close when they laughed, and glanced at the windows more than each other. When I introduced myself, said my truck was busted and I was just passing through, nobody seemed surprised. A woman handed me a paper cup of something warm and sweet and told me I was welcome to stay the night. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. As the evening wore on, I learned bits and pieces without ever really asking. Pine Hollow used to be bigger. A lot bigger. Families had moved away over the years, some all at once, others quietly, loading trucks in the dark and never saying goodbye. People said the town felt stuck. That was the word they used. Stuck. Like time didn't flow right there, like it pooled and went stagnant. They said it casually, like you might complain about bad cell service. Around 10, music started playing from a battered speaker. Old country songs, nothing festive, but it filled the space. Still, nobody danced. They just stood or sat, hands wrapped around cups, eyes flicking to the clock mounted above the stage. It was an old analog clock, yellowed face, black hands ticking louder than they should have. I caught myself watching it too, feeling my chest tighten as the minute hand crawled forward. A man about my father's age leaned toward me and said, almost apologetically, "Not many folks showed up this year." I asked if it was usually bigger. He shrugged. "Depends on the year." That should have been my cue to leave, but the roads were iced over and the snow was coming down harder. I told myself I was just tired, reading too much into things. Still, when 11:30 came and went, the room grew tense in a way I can't fully explain. Conversations died mid-sentence. The music skipped, then cut out entirely. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air had thickened. At exactly midnight, the clock stopped. Not slowed, not broke. Stopped. The second hand froze straight up, pointing at 12, and every person in that room went still with it. I don't mean quiet, I mean motionless. Cups hung halfway to mouths. A man stood with his mouth open, eyes fixed on nothing. I tried to laugh it off, tried to say something about the power cutting out, but my voice sounded wrong, too loud, like I'd shouted in a church. That's when I noticed the light outside. At first, it was just a glow between the trees, warm and bobbing. Then another, and another. Lanterns. Dozens of them drifting slowly through the woods that ring the town. They moved with intention, weaving between trunks, never colliding, never rushing. From inside the hall, it looked like the forest itself had learned how to breathe fire. Someone whispered behind me. "They're early this time." I turned, heart hammering, but nobody was looking at me. Their eyes were all on the windows, faces pale and slack. The woman who'd given me the drink earlier crossed herself with shaking fingers. A man near the door muttered, "We ain't past it yet." "We ain't past it." I asked what that meant. No one answered. The lanterns drew closer, and with them came sound. Not voices exactly, more like breathing layered over shuffling footsteps. The door rattled once, gently, as if someone had tested the handle and decided to wait. I felt an overwhelming sense that whatever was out there wasn't in a hurry. It knew something we didn't. The clock ticked, just once. Everyone in the room flinched like they'd been struck. The second hand jumped forward, then resumed its steady march. The music crackled back to life, though no one had touched the speaker. People started moving again, too fast, too frantic, as if they were making up for lost time. Chairs scraped, someone laughed hysterically. The door burst open and cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of damp leaves and smoke. I don't remember deciding to leave. I just know I found myself outside, boots slipping on the packed snow, the lantern light now close enough that I could see shapes behind it. People, maybe. Or something close enough that my mind filled in the gaps. They wore coats that hung wrong on their bodies, too long in the arms, too tight across the shoulders. Their faces were turned away. But I had the distinct feeling that if they looked at me, they wouldn't look like faces at all. I ran. I didn't follow the road. I cut between cabins, past dark windows and abandoned porches, my breath burning my lungs. Behind me, I heard footsteps match my pace. Not chasing, just keeping up, like they were making sure I stayed within a boundary I couldn't see. The woods opened up near the edge of town, and I stumbled onto the highway, collapsing beside my truck. The engine turned over on the first try, like it had never been sick at all. As I drove away, I looked back once. Pine Hollow sat quiet and dark again, lanterns gone. Forest still. It looked normal. Too normal. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. For months after, I told myself it had been exhaustion, altitude, stress, but the feeling never left me. That sense of having stepped somewhere I wasn't meant to be, somewhere time folded in on itself. I couldn't shake the idea that I'd left something behind in Pine Hollow, or maybe that something had come with me and was just waiting. In the spring, curiosity got the better of me. I went back. The road was there, but the turnoff wasn't marked anymore. No sign, no paint on the asphalt. I drove slowly and checking my map, but it showed nothing. Just forest, miles of it. Eventually I pulled over and walked into the trees where the town should have been. I found old foundations swallowed by moss, rusted nails, the faint outline of a road that led nowhere. No cabins, no hall, no sign Pine Hollow had ever been a place people lived. I asked around at nearby towns. Older folks shook their heads. Younger ones laughed. Pine Hollow? Never heard of it. One man told me there had never been a settlement in that hollow, not officially. Another suggested I'd mixed it up with a ghost town further south. But sometimes, late at night, I hear music cut out in the distance, followed by that thick, waiting silence. And I think about what that man said, about how it depends on the year, about how maybe Pine Hollow doesn't disappear, maybe it just resets. And maybe next winter, when the clock hits midnight and the lanterns come out, there will be even fewer people left inside the hall, frozen in place, waiting for permission to move. Just after midnight on New Year's Eve, I was driving back up the mountain toward my cabin, tires crunching over frozen gravel, the forest closing in tight on both sides like it always does after dark. I'd left my sister's place in town early, because the fog was rolling in thick and Appalachian roads. Don't forgive mistakes. The radio in my old Ford had been dead for years, nothing but static no matter what frequency I tried. So I drove in that familiar bubble of silence, listening to the engine strain and the wind brushing the bare branches overhead. Midnight passed without ceremony, no fireworks, no cheers. Just the dashboard clock flipping to 12 bop. As I rounded a bend where the trees leaned close enough to scrape the roof, that was when the radio clicked. Not static. A clean, sharp click, like someone had flipped a switch with purpose. I remember tightening my grip on the wheel because it startled me so bad my truck drifted toward the ditch. Before I could even reach for the knob, a calm voice came through, low and steady, like a late-night announcer who'd been doing this job too long to feel anything anymore. It didn't sound local. It didn't sound right. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "you didn't cross over." I actually laughed at first, just a nervous puff of air, because that's the kind of thing your brain does when it doesn't want to accept what it's hearing. I figured it was some prank station bleeding through, maybe someone messing with emergency frequencies. But then the voice started listing towns. Not big cities, not places you'd hear on a normal broadcast. It started with small mountain names, places tucked into hollows and valleys that only folks from around here even know. Each name was spoken slow, careful, followed by a pause, like the voice was waiting for something to answer back. Pine Fork. Then silence. Laurel Gap. Silence again. Coldwater Ridge. Every name made my stomach tighten because I'd been through most of those towns at one point or another, past their single gas stations, their sagging porches, their churches with hand-painted signs. This wasn't random. Whoever or whatever was speaking knew Appalachia the way you only do if you've lived it. The road climbed higher as the fog thickened, swallowing my headlights so the world shrank down to a narrow tunnel of gray. The voice kept going, methodical, patient. With each pause, the silence felt heavier, like pressure in my ears before a storm. I reached over and twisted the volume knob, half expecting the sound to cut out. It didn't. The voice stayed perfectly clear. When it finally said the name of my town, my heart slammed so hard it hurt. The word echoed through the cab like it had weight. There was no pause this time, no silence. The radio let out a sharp squeal, then went dead, darker than static, like someone had yanked the sound out by the roots. I drove the rest of the way on pure muscle memory, my mind refusing to settle on what had just happened. The cabin came into view, squat and dark against the tree line, porch light off because I'd forgotten to leave it on. I parked, sat there with the engine running longer than I needed to, listening for anything else. The forest was too quiet. No wind, no owls. Just that deep, hollow stillness you get when snow is coming or when something is wrong. Inside, I locked the door, checked the windows, and told myself to stop being stupid. Radios glitch, signals cross. People make weird broadcasts. I poured a drink to steady my hands and watched the clock on the wall tick past 12:30. Nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I slept. Morning came gray and cold. No snow, just low clouds snagged on the ridges. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee and felt it immediately. That wrongness, like the air had been drained of something important. My nearest neighbor's place sits about 100 yards down the road, a little white house with blue trim. Their truck is usually parked out front. That morning, the driveway was empty. I walked down, calling their names, thinking maybe they'd gone into town early. The front door was wide open, not broken, just open. Inside, the house was empty. No coats, no shoes by the door. The coffee pot sat cold on the counter. On the wall, their clock was frozen at exactly 12 a.m. I told myself it was coincidence. I had to. But as I walked farther down the road, my legs started to shake. House after house told the same story. Doors open, beds slept in, half-eaten food on tables, clocks all stuck at midnight, hands locked like they'd been welded there. About half the homes were like that. The rest looked normal, quiet but intact, their clocks ticking on like nothing had happened. There were no cars in the driveways of the empty ones. No tracks in the dirt or snow. It was like the people had been lifted straight out of their lives in the middle of the night. Cell service was spotty at best, but I managed to get through to the sheriff's office. My voice sounded far away to my own ears as I tried to explain. They told me to stay put, that deputies were already getting similar calls from other mountain roads. Similar. That word stuck with me. By noon, folks who were still around had gathered at the old church at the crossroads. Faces I'd known my whole life looked hollow, eyes darting to the tree line every time the wind stirred. We compared notes in low voices. Everyone who'd been driving around midnight had heard something on the radio. Different voices, same message. If you're hearing this, you didn't cross over. And every time, the broadcast ended when it reached the listener's town. No one could explain what crossing over meant, but we all felt it pressing in on us, heavy as the clouds overhead. Search parties went out into the woods that afternoon. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, just forest stretching on the same way it always has, patient and indifferent. As night fell, people started hearing things. Not voices exactly, sounds, like distant movement, branches snapping where no one should be walking, a low hum that came and went, too steady to be wind. That night I sat in my cabin with all the lights on, radio unplugged, shotgun across my lap. Just after midnight, I heard it. Not from the radio, from outside. A faint, almost polite knocking, somewhere far down the road, followed by a voice calling out names. Town names, the same ones I'd heard the night before. I didn't answer, neither did anyone else. The knocking moved closer, house by house, fading and returning, until it stopped somewhere near the edge of my property. I never saw anything. I just listened, heart hammering, until the sounds drifted back into the woods. It's been months now. The empty houses are still empty. Clocks still frozen. The forest hasn't given anything back. Radios don't work right anymore. Sometimes, late at night, you'll hear a broadcast cut through the static, listing places that don't have anyone left to hear them. I don't drive after dark now. I don't celebrate New Year's. And every time midnight comes, I check my clock just to make sure it keeps ticking, because I don't know what crossing over really means. I only know that something out there is keeping track, and one night it might decide my name belongs on its list. I'd moved the trailer up into the mountains because I wanted quiet. That was the honest reason I gave people. The deeper truth was I didn't want witnesses. The place sat on a narrow shelf cut out of the hillside, a rusted single wide I'd bought cheap from a man who wouldn't look me in the eye when he handed over the keys. There were no neighbors close enough to see my lights at night. No cell signal, and only one dirt road that twisted down the mountain like a scar. Appalachia closed around that trailer the way water closes over a stone. You stop hearing the outside world after a while. You start thinking the woods are breathing. New Year's Eve came and I didn't plan anything special. I had a small propane heater hissing by my feet, a pot of coffee gone bitter on the stove, and a wall clock I'd found nailed up by the previous owner. I remember glancing at it out of habit, seeing the minute hand creep toward midnight. I expected distant fireworks, maybe gunshots echoing from a hollow miles away. That's how it usually went up there. Celebrations carried thin and delayed through the valleys. But as 11:59 arrived, the woods went quiet in a way I'd never heard before. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that makes your ears ring. Even the wind died. It felt like something had put its hands over the mountains' mouths. Midnight came, and nothing happened. The clock didn't tick. It just stayed there, the second hand twitching but never moving forward. I told myself it was broken. Cheap things break all the time. Still, I waited, listening. No fireworks, no distant cheering, no dogs barking. I stepped outside with my coat half zipped and stood on the sagging porch. The moon hung low, pale and smeared, and the trees were frozen mid-sway, branches locked in place like a photograph. I could hear my own breath too clearly, like the world had shrunk down to just me and the trailer. I went back inside with a knot in my stomach I couldn't explain. I tried sleeping. I lay there on the narrow bed with the heater clicking on and off, counting the sounds I knew, metal popping, the soft hum of electricity. But something was missing. No owls, no insects. Even in winter, there's always something alive out there. After what felt like hours, I checked the clock again. Still 11:59. The coffee on the stove was still steaming faintly, like time hadn't touched it. I felt stupid for being scared of a clock, but fear doesn't ask permission. It just shows up and sits down. When I finally looked out the window again, the sky hadn't changed. The moon was in the same place, the shadows frozen. I opened the door and called out, my voice sounding wrong in the stillness. It didn't echo. It just stopped, like it had hit something solid. That's when I heard it. The faintest crunch of footsteps, far off but deliberate. Too slow to be an animal. I stood there, heart pounding until the sound faded. I locked the door and dragged the kitchen chair under the handle, feeling foolish and desperate at the same time. Hours passed. Or maybe they didn't. It's hard to explain when nothing moves. Hunger didn't come. Neither did sleep. At some point, I noticed something scratched into the frost on the window, right at eye level. Letters, shaky but intentional. Not yet. I don't know how long I stared at that before my legs gave out, and I sat on the floor, back against the wall, shaking so hard my teeth hurt. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. The way my father used to say the mountains remember everything. How my grandmother refused to celebrate New Year's after moving up here, saying you don't tempt old ground with new promises. I remembered a man who'd gone missing from a nearby hollow when I was a kid. How folks whispered he'd wandered somewhere he wasn't supposed to. Those memories felt heavier than they should have, like the night was pressing them into me. The footsteps came back, closer this time. I heard breathing outside the thin aluminum wall, wet and patient. A shape passed the window, too tall to be a dare, shoulders hunched like it had learned to walk upright out of necessity, not nature. I didn't look long enough to see a face. I didn't want to. The smell came through the cracks then, dirt, old sweat, something rotten and human. A fingernail scraped along the siding, slow, testing. Whoever it was knew I was inside, knew I wasn't going anywhere. I whispered that I'd leave, that I'd go back down the mountain. The breathing stopped. The silence pressed in again. Then a voice, close to the wall, low and cracked like it hadn't been used much. "Ain't time," it said. Just those two words. My throat closed up. I slid down until I was curled on the floor, hands over my ears like that could block it out. Eventually, exhaustion did what fear couldn't, and I slept in fragments. Each time I woke, the clock still read 11:59. Each time, the woods were unchanged. At some point, I noticed tracks around the trailer when I looked through the window, bare footprints in the frost, too many of them, circling. Some small, some large, all human, all leading back into the trees, never away. I don't know when I understood what the night wanted. It wasn't punishment, it was remembrance. The mountains weren't angry. They were patient. They were holding on to everything that had ever happened on them, every broken promise, every body that never made it home. New Year's meant forgetting, moving forward. Appalachia doesn't like to forget. It holds you in place until you carry the weight properly. I started talking then, out loud. I confessed things I'd never said, not even to myself. I talked about the accident on that same road years ago, the way I'd driven away instead of stopping. About the man who might have lived if I'd been braver. The woods listened. The breathing outside slowed. The scratching stopped. When my voice finally gave out, the clock ticked. Just once. The minute hand jerked forward. Midnight passed like a held breath being released. Somewhere far off, a single firework cracked, muted and lonely. The skies shifted, shadows crawling back into motion. I cried harder than I ever have, not from relief, but from grief I didn't know I was carrying. Morning came dull and gray. The tracks were gone. The frost had melted. The trailer felt wrong, like it had been hollowed out. I packed what I could and left without looking back. I don't live in the mountains anymore. I don't celebrate New Year's. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the clock hesitates between minutes, I swear I hear breathing just beyond the walls. And I know, deep down, that night is still there, waiting, holding on.